Good evening to our readers and our viewers joining us from across the country. Welcome to the special People's World Town Hall, Labor's Fight Back, Where Do We Go From Here? I'm CJ Atkins, I'm the managing editor of People's World, and I'll be the moderator for tonight's conversation. For those of you who are regular readers of People's World, or if you keep up with the labor media generally, or if you've tuned into any of the big demonstrations that have been happening lately, well, we've got a lineup of folks that probably don't need too much introduction. You're probably familiar with them, and they don't need too much to introduce. But I'll give just a brief overview of the kind of heavy hitters that we have with us this evening. Elise Bryant is the president of the Coalition of Labor Union Women, also co-executive director of the Labor Heritage Foundation, part of the DC Labor Chorus. She's part of my union, the CWA Newspaper Guild. A playwright, labor educator, you name it, she's done it. Good evening, Elise.
Evening, CJ.
We have Keith Richardson, who is the president of the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists in Chicago, and is well known in around the country as a really outspoken leader of the American Postal Workers Union. Heads up Chicago Local 1. Got his start with the USPS there in Chicago. Became sort of a breakout labor leader as part of the AFL-CIO Young Workers Advisory Council. And as I said, he's known nationally as a spokesperson for the Postal Workers. So good evening, Keith.
Thank you. Good evening.
And we have Hamilton Nolan, whose bylines you see regularly in these times. He's a labor journalist, but also has appeared in The Guardian, New York Times, Washington Post, Splinter, was known for being one of the leaders who helped unionize Gawker Media back in 2015, proud member of the Writers Guild, and author of the book that just came out last year, The Hammer, Power, Inequality, and the Struggle for the Soul of Labor. Good evening, and thanks for joining us, Hamilton.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so our format this evening is we're going to have sort of a roundtable discussion. We have some prepared questions for the guests, but we want to also give them plenty of opportunity to talk about the struggles that they and their organizations are involved in, and just let them also shape the discussion. But we do know that Elise has a tight time schedule this evening. She has other events that she has to be at and may have to leave us a little early. So Elise, I wanted to give you the first word, so to speak. A few weeks ago, I think it was in late February, I saw a video of you at a rally in DC. You were with some federal workers who were out there protesting, and I think you started to sing your own version of Which Side Are You On?
Yes.
And you were up there singing, Trump's now coming for us. He wants us to fail, but we know what we want. We want Trump in jail. As we mentioned,
Good.
as I mentioned, you head up CLUE, the Coalition of Labor Union Women, and women have definitely been a major target of this administration. Trump has definitely been coming for them, as your song kind of said. So what are you seeing right now in terms of how women in the labor movement are standing up and getting themselves organized to respond?
Well, it actually started with the decision to revoke Roe v. Wade. And we got calls from women all over the country. I was on several town hall meetings where literally thousands of women, not just union women, but non-union women around the country were going, this is outrageous. And it went across the age range. And we find that's true in CLUE. In fact, we have 3 new chapters starting that started literally like the year that Donald Trump was elected, and they were just like, "Oh no, we got to get together here. We need to come together as women because we are being attacked on multiple levels." And so the energy is very strong, and we're doing a lot of connecting with women in the community as well, particularly now with these outrageous downsizing, firing of federal workers that this bunch of oligarchs really think they can get away with.
Yeah, and we're coming off what's really been one of the biggest May Days in U.S. history in a long time, and women workers were really out front, both on the stages at demonstrations, but also in the streets protesting. And I think there was like 250,000 people out marching on May Day. in various places around the country. So, maybe it's no surprise that this didn't just get started, like you just emphasized, right? This has been building for a while, and the Trump administration has been giving us a lot to get pissed off about, I guess, right? These oligarchs.
Yes.
So, turning next to Keith, if we're going to be talking about being on the front lines in this fight back, there's probably very few groups of workers who have been more militant, more vocal, and more affected over the last few months than the members of your union, the Postal Workers. So I'm just wondering, what have been some of the successful strategies and tactics that you all have been relying on? What's motivating your workers? What's moving them to the streets, to the halls of Congress? What's getting them active?
So first and foremost, I'm an employee of the United States Postal Service. Our industry has been around for 250 years. The public relies on us to provide a service daily. Millions of pieces of mail that we process every day, and we deliver to millions of addresses every day. We rely on the public to keep us going because we don't rely on tax dollars. And it's just an assault on our industry that the current administration is trying to dismantle us and possibly privatize the postal service to sell us off to the highest bidder. So we're relying on the public to stand with us so that we can keep processing the mail. Here in Chicago, part of the American Postal Workers Union, we represent the clerks who process the mail in the back. We sell the stamps at the windows. The motor vehicle drivers is also the maintenance employees. So we're proud workers, that hundreds of thousands of proud women and men who go to work every day to make sure that America's mail is moved. 40% of the world's mail is processed by the United States Postal Service. So, we're not immune from the onslaught. The oligarchies are coming for us, and we're asking on the public to stand with us to keep our institution the great organization that it is.
Mm-hmm. And both you and Elise have brought up the oligarchy. The billionaires, the sort of groups of the ruling class who have coalesced around Trump. But it's not just Trump, and it's not just the Republicans, right? And Hamilton, I was listening to a podcast that you had. I think it was earlier this year. It was you and Sarah Nelson of the flight attendants, and maybe one or two other folks were on there. And there was something that you raised there, which was that there's a big section of the Democratic Party and even some labor leaders who in this moment, their impulse is to sort of compromise with Trump. They think that with a person like this, the only way you can get something out of them is to give in on some of their points, or at least talk the language that they want to hear. But you said, you responded to that's not what we need to be doing. You said, I think it was something like, we need to get more hardcore in how we're responding. So I'm just wondering, what do you think that looks like? What do you think is the political prescription for labor right now, given, Elise and Keith were talking about some of those very bread and butter, nuts and bolts issues that their workers are facing. So just want to give you a shot to tell us what that looks like.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's really no question, regardless of what your politics is, the fact is that what Donald Trump has done to the labor movement in 3 months is the worst thing that any president has done to labor, probably, since World War II or even before that. I mean, this is many, many times worse than what Reagan did with PATCO, what Trump did to the federal workers, what he did to the TSA workers by throwing their contract in the trash and then proceeding to try to throw all the federal workers' contracts in the trash, what he's doing by effectively shutting down the NLRB. I mean, this is above and beyond anything that even the worst Republican presidents have done. So I think as a baseline, all of us in the labor movement have to recognize and realize that we're fighting for our life here. This is not whatever normal political times are, we're not in that. We are in a struggle for the survival of the labor movement as we know it. And so when I say we need to get more hardcore, I think it's rational at this point. You don't have to really even consider yourself a radical to become a radical when the situation gets this extreme. And so I think the labor movement needs to be thinking in terms of a general strike, even though I'm well aware that a general strike is a bit of a cliche. You know, the lefties are always calling for a general strike, the radicals are always calling for a general strike, and it gets dismissed. At a certain point, you have to look at what's happening right now under Trump and say, what moves do we have left? What moves does organized labor have left? Because we've had a lot of lawsuits filed, but ultimately lawsuits are not going to do it. You know, I don't think anybody believes that 4 years of lawsuits are going to hold the line on where we are in the labor movement. We're going to have to be in the streets. Every union is going to have to get, I think, more willing to strike, and we're going to have to think in bigger terms and national terms as a movement. Think about how we can pull off things like national strikes, sector-wide strikes, things that a lot of union leaders don't want to talk about, and things that are hard and dangerous for workers. But I think the fact is that we don't have very many moves left.
You know, it's not just, it seems to me, it's not just the radicals and the lefties who are at least bringing up that term general strike. You know, it is something that you're hearing more often. People are talking about, you know, there's the discussion about aligning contracts for 2028 May Day, right? So building up to that moment where there could be this kind of move. But like you said, you know, when you're living in extreme times, then tactics that used to look extreme don't feel so extreme anymore, right? When you're trying to respond to these things.
Yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, you know, one thing that I always remember is that the stuff that Trump is doing is not popular. You know, there's not a huge popular groundswell of people saying we want to shut down the Postal Service. That's not a thing. This is coming from an extreme position on the right. And so we have to also keep in mind that we are the majority in this case.
Absolutely, and those positions of the extreme right and these kind of circumstances, you know, coming back to Elise for a moment, just before the election last year, you were talking, I think, about some of those extreme circumstances that we could be facing. You were talking about how we don't want to go back. We don't want to go back to times where we're burning books like a bunch of Nazis in Germany. We don't want to go back to the robber baron days when you had the wealthy capitalists getting away with not paying their taxes. We don't want to go back to blaming people who cross borders looking for a better life and try to blame them for everything that's going wrong. Well, now here we are, right? Several months from that election, and it seems we've kind of entered that world where we have a president, we have a government who is trying to get us to go back to do all of those things that you were talking about. So what do we need to be doing next? Where do we need to go to make sure we're not going back? You know, the midterms are still a good ways away from now. So what kind of things can we be doing now to make sure we're not going back even further?
A lot of it's happening, right? I mean, people are having town hall meetings. Unions are organizing town hall meetings to help educate and have dialogue about what's really going on behind all of this propaganda that goes in the headlines. And as I was listening to Hamilton speak, I was thinking about how, our power lies in our ability to withhold our labor. And that is the power of stopping them from making money. And anything that we do and that we plan on doing in the future has to interrupt their ability to make money. So strikes, boycotts are the things, and it's particularly with boycotts. We want to bring the community into this as well to see that this isn't just about unionized, organized labor, but about the real bread and butter issues that affects everyone. And certainly with them talking about Medicaid and Medicare and Social Security, more people are energized and engaged. And we saw that by these rallies that are happening around the country in states where they don't usually have rallies like that. And I'm really intrigued to be working with more folks in the community as we go through this, because this is the other piece of it. This is sort of off. No, it's not. It's I think part of what I feel is important in terms of being out and doing town halls and doing education is that we have to understand the racism that is rooted in this country that was created to divide the working class. I mean, there was always caste and there was always class in Europe and other countries in Asia and Africa. But this idea that the color of your skin made you a different race is unique to America and is endemic in everything that they're attempting to do, from banning DEI in organizations, attacking universities and colleges for having this program. It is outrageous. And I think that for me, part of my work is getting that education out there, letting folks know to understand the issues as to be able to break it down and to really address the racism that's not only in the Republicans, it's also in the Democrats, it's in the labor movement itself. It has never been dealt with dramatically or directly. And I feel like that's really important work is to be talking about unlearning racism and sexism, but racism is what I
Absolutely.
really
It's, I think
masking the whole class thing.
what you just described is, that's something that we try to do at People's World too, is draw those connections so that people see that, this is not just one group in its own individual struggle, right? These things are linked by race, by gender, and other factors. And you brought up these campaigns to eliminate DEI, to eliminate, education around the history of racism and the history of the struggle against racism. And then you mentioned boycotts. And I think we've seen that a lot of the Main Street Press, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, when some of these consumer boycotts started happening around DEI, they were very dismissive, right? They were eager to report the next day, oh, sales did not decline, traffic did not decline. But what we've seen, especially in some of those targeted boycotts, like Target, just to use the same word,
Yeah.
Target, once you start seeing after a few weeks, a few months, the numbers start rolling in and they're having an effect. And I know in a lot of locales around DC, for instance, it's been the African American community that's been sort of playing the key role in some of those boycotts around DEI. So do you think like this strategy or this tactic of boycott is something that could be taken, on a bigger scale?
Oh,
Not just
absolutely.
around, maybe not just around DEI, but what other things could it be connected to?
I totally agree. I think we have to, because we didn't learn anything else in the 70s and the 80s, is it takes multiple interventions. There's no one cure for any of this. And so we need to be thinking about how to go at it on different levels and to go deeply and broadly.
Mm, deeply and broadly, and going at different levels. Uh, Keith, I was looking back through some of our coverage in People's World about the postal workers the postal workers struggles, and I have to say, whenever we do a story on postal workers, it really blows up. It gets a lot of circulation. Your folks are out there getting our stories out, and so we're happy to be a platform to highlight those things. But there was one of our reporters interviewed you. I think it was last summer. And it was when I think it was like 200,000 postal workers were in a fight for a big contract. And you talked about how the postal workers were looking at the examples of the Teamsters at UPS and the auto workers in their contracts, where they sort of established these industry-wide standards. And you said that's something you wanted to do for your members too. So, what I found interesting was that you talked about how there was this crossover experience. Unions were learning from each other, what they had, what struggles they had been involved in, what worked, what didn't. Teamsters, auto workers, postal workers. So I'm just wondering, are there ways in which, because you don't just wear the postal workers hat, you're also with the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists. What are some of the ways that CBTU and some of these broader labor organizations play in kind of facilitating that sort of collaboration or sharing of tactics that you talked about?
We're able to share our voices and come together to help out in common causes. Unlike other unions, the postal workers are prohibited from striking. In our contract, we can't do it because we don't rely on tax dollars. We operate solely on the sale of stamps and the products we sell. But we provide an essential service to the country, to every address, no matter if you live in Inuit village in Alaska, if you live in the foothills of Arizona. We touch every place in the country. Where UPS and FedEx won't go, they drop their mail off on our docks, and we deliver it the last mile. If we could take anything away from Teamsters, which my mom, she was a proud member of Local 743 here in Chicago for over 40 years. Their ability to do the walkout and to the strike is inspiring, even though we can't do it. But postal workers sit in a silo where we thought we were just all alone. And now when it's affecting us, when we can lose our jobs, when the president of the United States is calling on Congress to break us up, we need our fellow organizations and institutions, People World, Clue. We need everyone to come together to hear our plight so that we can remain the number one trusted institution in the world that's delivering to every address in the country and many places worldwide. So we have to use our collective voices to come together and be that beacon for each of us.
And have the postal workers been seeing that kind of response? Because they're in the target right now too. They're in under the Trump administration's goal about privatizing postal service and a lot of the things you've talked about. So, what kind of response have you gotten from some of the other sectors of labor?
It's been great. Just like we've been there from day one with our sisters and brothers in AFG. That they've been there for us because what affects one, it affects all. If they're successful in dismantling the United States Postal Service, if they're able to parcel us out, it can happen to anybody. So it's important for us all to stick together to make sure that we remain solvent. Because if they can get rid of us, if they can take away our collective bargaining rights, it can happen to anyone. And we're thankful for AFG. We're thankful for Unite Here. We're thankful for USW, CLUE, the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists, LACLA, Apollo for standing up with us, and also all of the different the AFL-CIO and the Central Labor Councils all over the country. When the postal workers are in trouble, everybody comes to help, and we are very appreciative of that.
You just listed off a whole long list of unions and labor organizations, and it's kind of like the makings of a big coalition.
It's a
In what you
great
just
big coalition. What do they all have in common? A mailbox.
mailbox. That's right. That's
They
right.
all have a mailbox in common. They all rely on the United States Postal Service, day in and day out.
Yeah. So a coalition of that size and with that number of unions, it kind of can make you feel optimistic about what's ahead. Um, now, Hamilton, to come back around to you, labor it's not just your beat as a journalist. I know it's also your life as an activist, as an organizer yourself at various times. So I know that unions and their ability to survive is something that you've given a lot of attention to in your reporting, in your other writing, in your book that I mentioned. But I also know that you're someone who is kind of known for injecting some sobriety into situations, right? To kind of keep us grounded when it comes to what's labor's strength at any given moment, right? What's a real analysis of the balance of forces. So we've talked about, it's so great. We have all of these different actions happening, these different unions coming together. But I'm just wondering, given the research you do in this area, how do you assess the current state of labor's fight back? Where are we at?
Well, organized labor in America, even after more than 50, 60, 70 years of decline, is still strong. We still have 15 million plus union members in this country. So in absolute terms, the labor movement still has potential strength. I do think that it's important for us who are in the labor movement, who care about the labor movement, to be honest with ourselves about the fact that we are greatly weakened from where we are a generation ago, 2 generations ago. One of the reasons why we're greatly weakened is because one of the reasons is because we're under corporate assault, we're under legal assault, we're under government assault. But the other reason is that we have not successfully organized enough of the workforce, to keep union density at those high levels that it was a generation, 2 generations, 3 generations ago. And so we still need to prioritize new organizing. We need to recognize that A lot of the general public is not plugged into the labor movement, is not connected to the labor movement, does not know much about unions, does not have family members in unions. And we have to prioritize getting more people into the labor movement always, no matter what else is going on. So that's what we need to do in an outward facing sense. And I think those of us who are in the labor movement already, who are in unions, we need to really prioritize getting the institutions of the labor movement, the AFL-CIO and places like that, to think collectively and to think on a national scale. So when we talk about trying to meet the assault that the Trump administration is putting down on us right now at a national scale, and in the terms that Elise was talking about, in ways where you can affect their money, right? Which is the central power of the labor movement, withholding our labor. To be able to do that at scale, the labor movement needs to think collectively, which means a lot of unions need to be able to sit down at a table and plan actions and carry out actions at a national scale. And that is something that we don't see a lot. And I'm not trying to minimize how difficult it is to organize people, because I've organized, and all of us here probably know that organizing is difficult and workers take risks. But I would like to see us within the labor movement try to push the leaders of this movement and push the institutions at the top of this movement to show the urgency of this moment, because we really are in an existential moment of crisis. We are under a threat. And so let's see some urgency. Let's see some national level collective action, and let's see a little radicalism even from the unions that don't consider themselves that radical.
Yeah, you just mentioned about the question of density, right? And how yes, there's been this big corporate assault for generations now, but also we haven't done enough to bring new people in. I was just listening to someone the other day talk about the era of PATCO, which I think has been mentioned once or twice this evening, and how the labor movement even is not where it was then in terms of numbers. But I guess then there's also the issue of there's quantity and then there's quality. And in that same discussion, somebody responded, well, yeah, we don't have the numbers, but the class consciousness, the sort of broader outlook of labor today is different than it was even during the PATCO kind of years, the early 80s. And, the example was brought up of the campaign around Kilmar Abrego Garcia, right? This immigrant worker who was kidnapped away. And on May Day, you saw a lot of unions sort of making that a central issue of their marches, which is a different development. So I'm just wondering, how do you see that change? The quantity of the size of the labor movement versus its consciousness and its outlook.
There's always I think there's always great people within the labor movement. There's always great unions in the labor movement. There's always great activists in the labor movement. And as a labor journalist who gets to go out and talk to a lot of people in the labor movement all over the country, I've met the most inspiring people you could possibly imagine within this labor movement. So there will always be great people with great class consciousness in this movement that has millions of members. But again, let's be really clear. When PATCO happened under Reagan, union density was well over 20%, 22, 23%. This year, union density fell under 10%. Union density is now in the single digits. And you didn't see the AFL-CIO put out a press release when union density fell into single digits for the first time in 100 years, which happened this year. People don't even know about that. So I do think it behooves us to be honest with ourselves, to be brutally honest with ourselves. If we care about the labor movement, we need to recognize that our numbers are consistently declining and say, why is this happening? And what do we need to do? And what resources do we need to expend to turn that around?
All right, we're at 8:30, and I know, like I said, Elise has to go. So I just wanted to take a moment to say thanks, Elise, for joining us. We don't want to keep you from your other responsibilities, but we appreciated what you brought to us for the evening.
Thank you, and I would love to come back and have more discussion with you. We're on the move. It's going to happen. We have no choice. We cannot turn back. We cannot go back. We're only going to go forward. So thank you, my brother Keith, my brother Hamilton. Thank you, CJ. Thank you, Taryn. Y'all have a good night.
This
Thank
is
you
the
very
first time
much.
I've been in the labor setting with Elise, and she didn't sing, so I feel slighted.
Yeah, we didn't get a song. We didn't get a song.
They divide us by our color. They
Man,
divide us by our tongue. They divide us men and women. They divide us old and young. But they'll tremble at our voices when they hear these verses sung. that the union brought my family up and out of poverty. The union made it possible for me to get a bachelor's and a master's degree. The union took me to countries I only dreamed of because the union makes us strong. You have a good night.
Thank you so much. I think that needs to be added to a new edition of the Little Red Songbook. Okay, we've gotten a couple of questions from our listeners. So one person in New Jersey asked us, what's our strategy? What should be our strategy in dealing with the Democratic Party? Not just the national Democratic Party leadership, but locally at our county and our state level. And you have the progressive wing, you have the more centrist wing of the party. So how should labor manage its relationship, especially when we're in this sort of off-election period? Keith, maybe you want to offer some thoughts first.
I'm a registered Democrat. I believe in working with my party to make them stronger where they're faltering and weak. I want to give advice to help build them up and not tear them down. So I'll leave it there. I think we need to work together to make sure that the party is sustained and strong, that they're speaking up for our values. I still believe in them. They're a work in progress. So let's work together to strengthen them up.
All right, work in progress. How about you, Hamilton?
Yeah, I think people should realize that the Democratic Party is just a vessel, that moves whichever way it's pushed. So if you're in the labor movement and you want the Democrats to be better, especially on the local level, run for office. I would love to see more union members running for office. And you do see that in certain places. You do see that in certain unions that are very successful with that. And it's a great way to build power, especially on the local level. The local level is where the action is. It's a lot easier to make change on the local level than on the national level. So get involved, run for local office, and get your union to support you. Your union is a power base to get involved in the Democratic Party and push it to where you want to be.
Yeah, I'm glad you both emphasized that the way you did. That the Democratic Party is not some static thing. It's just like any other political institution. It's what we can make of it, and there are those opportunities, especially at the local level, for labor candidates. Now, here's a kind of a bonus question that came up whenever the organizers were thinking of how to structure this panel. So we were looking at things like the fact that you have this rising class consciousness among the working class right now. You see it in the stand-up strike. You see it in the UPS, the Teamsters. You see it in the Postal Workers, and you especially see it now that federal workers are really under attack. And I think last year there was a survey done, and something like 80% of respondents said that concentration of wealth and power in corporations and a small number of individuals, that was what people saw as the biggest problem facing the country. So, we have all of these various resistance movements, the actions that the two of you and Elise talked about tonight. So I'm kind of wondering, how do we really show in a big dramatic way that labor is making its comeback? Do we need a big show of force, kind of an announcement that labor is back on the scene? And somebody mentioned to me the other day, what about a national march on Washington? Something like Solidarity Day back in 1981, where you had union members packing Washington and showing in a real tangible way that labor had some muscle. So I'm wondering, do you think we're at that kind of moment where we should be building toward that kind of big, show of force type of action? Maybe we'll switch it up. Who wants to go first?
I do. I mean, just look at April 5th, the big mass demonstrations that happened all over the country, which I was a part of. May 1st here in Chicago, I think one of the biggest May Day rallies that we've had in decades. Again, we're stronger when we all come together and we're talking about our common, the things that bring us in common and the things that don't. We have to, like 33 years ago when I started for the Postal Service, it was a booming industry for workers. That was a path to the middle class. Homeowners, you can buy a car, money in the bank. We never thought that it would get to the point where we would be threatened with a rift. That they would maybe try to invoke our no layoff clause. Thoughts of privatizing the postal service. It was unheard of. Now when we're needing help, we have to give help. At one point, it was just about us. We are stronger together. So if we're using our collective voices, if we're having more demonstrations coming together, people from all walks of life, no matter if you're straight, gay, no matter the ethnicity, what do we have in common? It's the labor movement. I personally think the labor movement in the country is strong, but we just have to come together. The organizations, CBTU, LACLA, PALA, we all have to start talking and communicating and passing around best practices and even talking about what we're doing wrong to make us all stronger. So yes, if we demonstrate together more, if we talk together more, and when I'm in trouble or you're in trouble, we have to be there for one another, like it was when my mom was coming up in the Teamsters Union, when my grandmother was coming up in the National Alliance, because she was a former postal worker. We're stronger together. We had more victories together than losses. So the key is to stay together, stick together, and we can make a difference for everyone.
Yeah, I totally agree with Keith, and I think the biggest sentiment that I hear from people since Trump has been elected is like, what do we do? The sentiment is there. People want to fight back. People want a way to fight back, and you mentioned the big days of protest that have happened, and you've seen how many people came out for those. I grew up in St. Augustine, Florida. That is a red county. And my family told me that on one of those big days of protest, they had 800 people come out in my hometown and protest against Trump, which is mind blowing to me as somebody who grew up there. So that just goes to show, the sentiment in the public to fight back is there. And the labor movement can be the catalyst, to provide not just actions, not just marches, which are things that we should do, but also, when we mobilize these people, tell people that the labor movement can be their tool. People are looking for a tool that will give them the power to fight back. And we can give them something even bigger than a protest, even bigger than a march. We can give them a union. And so we need to be mobilizing people, but also educating people and helping to teach people that, like, look, your most powerful tool can come if you organize your workplace. You can have a union. You will be able to wield a level of power that is beyond what we're doing out here today on this march. So this can be a way for the labor movement to grow. This can be a way for the labor movement to give people power. People are looking for something right now to fight back. So this can be a big moment of opportunity for unions also, I think.
Yeah, someone who's listening, they had a question that was in response to, we're talking about the need to all be standing together. Sometimes that means on the streets, in protests, in marches, on picket lines, whenever there's a strike. But they also, the listener drew attention to the fact that Trump just signed an executive order about using U.S. troops potentially, on the street against demonstrations, and we saw that back in 2020 when Black Lives Matter protests were happening, and we remember what happened in Lafayette Park. So, just wondering, do we see the potential that this could be used against workers too? Maybe it's not just the protest movements. What about labor? Should we be concerned about that kind of thing? Either of you might have a thought about it.
I defer to Hamilton.
Okay.
I mean, yes, I think that's going to happen. I think it's only a matter of time before that happens. As you said, Trump wanted to do that in 2020. He wanted to use the military to suppress the protests in 2020, and he was kind of restrained from doing that by some of the people who were around him then. And obviously now he doesn't have those kind of restraints on him. So I expect that. I mean, to me, if that doesn't happen, I'll be surprised. I think we should expect that. Again, it's like the labor movement has a special role to play because we're the ones who allow you to exercise power in a nonviolent way, but in a way that's greater than just waving a sign in the street. If the government is going to oppress us or call out the military, people are going to say, how do we fight back? Like, what do we do in this situation if you can't go in the streets and protest? And as Elise touched on earlier, we're the ones who give you that power to shut down the money. And it's nonviolent. You don't have to fight a cop. You don't have to fight a soldier in the street. You don't have to get shot. You can organize and you can exercise this kind of power. So the labor movement has a really special and important role to play, I think, under that kind of oppression that is probably going to come at some point under Trump.
Yeah, it seems to kind of come back to a point that Keith made earlier, right? He was using the example of the Postal Service. If those postal workers don't want the mail to go through, it won't go through, right? And it just kind of shows the power of labor, I guess, that we have in the workplace. Even if, Trump is calling out the police or the troops, we still have power in our workplaces, right? Yes. Is that the point you were making, Keith?
Yes, and history, it's happened before, back in the 1970s when there was when we were able to strike, it was a walkout. The United States government brought in troops to try to work our mail. They couldn't do it. They said it's unskilled labor, that anybody could put mail in the cubbyhole, anybody could deliver to the addresses. It was a standstill. So power to people prevails over fascism and hate.
Absolutely. And I think that kind of seems to be the theme of our evening, right? Is that it's in unity. That's where our power is, right? And whenever we can make the wheel stop turning, then those in power have to pay attention to us. We're coming up on around 45 minutes, so we don't want to keep you too long. We really appreciate having both of you here, but I want to give you, each a sort of last opportunity to say, what are your predictions, or what's your wish list for the labor movement in the next 2 years, 4 years, looking down the road? Where do you want us to be? Start with Hamilton.
Where I want us to be is organizing at a massive scale. We know that unions are more popular than they've been in 60 years. We know that tens of millions of Americans will say in surveys that they would like to have what unions have to offer. And yet, union density has continued to go down, even under Biden, who was a very union-friendly president. So, I hope that the labor movement itself can rally itself, prioritize bringing the people into the labor movement who want to be in it, which means spending a whole lot of our money organizing new workers. That's what we need to stay strong and to remain strong. I hope that unions can act together in concert to form a united front against what's happening under Trump. And I hope that all of us recognize the urgency and get through the next 4 years. And what Keith just said made me remember that during World War II, the coal miners went on strike, and they told them it was illegal, and they sent in soldiers to try to replace the coal miners. And there was a saying back then, which was, you can't dig coal with the bayonet, which reminded me of the point that Keith was making, which is like, the government can order you to do something, but ultimately, if you do the work, you have the power. And those of us in the labor movement are the ones who can give you unions to exercise that power. So that's what I'd like to see.
All right. United front. You're talking our language now. How about you, Keith? Where would you like to see labor in the next few years? What's your wish list?
I want to see the labor movement to continue to be the driving force that promotes unity, the infrastructure that that we see. I want us to be a strong movement, inclusive of everyone. We want to see a strong workforce. We want to see people who are standing up for the right thing. Again, organized labor are not just Democrats. They're Republicans. They're Libertarians. They're people from all walks of life. We might not all agree with one another, but at the end of the day, first and last, we get up, we get dressed, and we go to work. we have to keep being that beacon. We have to keep being that entity that keeps this country going. So I want to see the labor movement to remain strong and solvent and not back down.
All right. I think you've both given us some great parting thoughts. And the labor movement, if you count all the people who want to be a part of it, it's pretty damn powerful, I think, right? When you add it to the people who have a union and those who want to have one. And so I think our task is to try to get more of those people in. I want to thank you both for being with us tonight, and thank the viewers who tuned in. Please check peoplesworld.org for more of the coverage, focusing on the type of struggles that we've been discussing tonight, and check out Hamilton's writings over at In These Times. We always like to keep up with what's going on there too. But yeah, thanks both of you for being with us.
Support your local post office. Buy some stamps tomorrow.
All right, we're going to get to the post office tomorrow.
Absolutely.
Thank
All right,
you.
thanks.